If there was one thing the Collins twins knew better than anyone, it was loss. Not the dramatic kind that comes with headlines or sirens, but the slow, grinding kind that takes pieces of your life quietly year after year, until one morning you wake up and realize you're standing in the ruins of what used to be home. For more than 30 years, their family had run a small handyman shop on the corner of Elm Street, the kind of place older customers still called the boy's father's shop, even long after he passed. People trusted the Collins name. People relied on it. And for most of their lives, the twins believed that trust alone could keep a business standing. But the past few years had turned into a storm that never seemed to end. First came the rising rent on the old brick building that held their shop. Then came a string of repairs they couldn't afford after a massive freeze burst the pipes the previous winter. By the time the landlord pushed through the final eviction notice, the brothers were already selling off old tools just to keep their truck running. The shop closed quietly one Thursday afternoon, without a farewell sign or even a final customer. The Collins twins locked the door for the last time, feeling like they were leaving a part of themselves behind. Now, months later, they lived in a small rented room above a garage, doing odd jobs whenever someone remembered to call. Their savings barely covered groceries. Their truck drank more oil than fuel. Every week felt like a fight to hold on to the little they still had. That was when the older of the two stumbled upon a local listing for a storage auction. Not the glamorous kind from TV, but a simple, unpolished sale at a facility just outside town. He mentioned it to his brother over black coffee the next morning, and for the first time in weeks, they both felt something that resembled hope. They didn't expect to win anything valuable. They didn't even expect to bid. But curiosity, mixed with quiet desperation, led them to the auction lot on a warm Saturday morning. The facility stretched in long rows of faded green doors, each one carrying someone's forgotten past. Most units already had clusters of bidders hovering in front of them, pointing at old furniture, broken appliances, or mountains of boxes. The twins kept to the back, not wanting to draw attention. They had only $120 between them, hardly enough to compete with the seasoned buyers and resellers walking confidently across the asphalt. Then came Unit 46. The auctioneer rolled up the door with a loud metallic rattle that echoed across the lot. Sunlight spilled into a cramped space packed floor to ceiling with black trash bags, dozens of them, stacked in uneven towers, squeezed between sagging cardboard boxes, dented plastic totes, and what looked like a large wooden trunk shoved into the back corner. The air that drifted out carried the faint scent of dust and old plastic. Nothing unusual, nothing promising. Most bidders took a single glance and turned away. Trash bags rarely meant treasure. They meant work, disappointment, and more dump fees than profit. But the twins didn't turn away. There was something about the unit that stopped them in place. Maybe the sheer number of bags, maybe the way the wooden trunk looked far too heavy to have been moved recently, or maybe just the simple reality that nobody else wanted it. The auctioneer waited for a bid, tapping the side of his clipboard when silence lingered too long. He finally called out a starting number that made a few people snort, assuming nobody in their right mind would take it. Yet something stirred in the brothers, a fragile instinct born not from greed, but from the memory of every customer who once told their father, "You boys know how to fix anything. You make something out of nothing." Maybe this was their moment to prove that old belief true, one more time. They lifted their hand. The bid was small, barely noticeable, but it was enough. No one countered. The auctioneer's voice cracked across the open lot. "Sold." For a moment, the twins just stood there, trying to understand what they had done. They had spent nearly everything they had left on a unit filled with nothing but trash bags, a dented trunk, and boxes that sagged like they were holding regrets rather than valuables. They could already hear their father's voice in their memory, not scolding them, but reminding them that every risk holds a lesson, and every lesson holds a chance, if you're willing to look closer. As they walked toward the opened unit, the reality of what waited inside hit them slowly. The plastic bags rustled lightly in the breeze, shifting like they were hiding something beneath their dark surfaces. The cardboard boxes seemed oddly heavy, as if packed by someone who either cared too much or not at all. And the old wooden trunk, half buried under the mess, sat like a silent secret the previous owner had never intended anyone to find. They didn't know yet whether they had made the biggest mistake of their lives or stumbled into the kind of luck their family hadn't seen in years. But they knew this. They had 48 hours to clear the unit, 2 pairs of hands, and nothing left to lose. Somewhere inside those bags and boxes, something waited, something forgotten, something hidden, something that might change the shape of their future. And as they stepped into the shadows of Unit 46, they felt the weight of the moment settle on their shoulders, steady and undeniable. If you've ever rooted for someone to catch a break when life keeps knocking them down, stay with us. The deeper they dig into this unit, the stranger this story becomes. The moment the twins stepped into Unit 46, the air shifted. Not in the dramatic way movies show it, but in the subtle, unmistakable way that happens when you cross a threshold into someone else's forgotten life. The temperature dipped slightly, carrying a dry scent of dust mixed with something older, a faint trace of cedar from the trunk, plastic from the bags, and the stale heaviness of cardboard that had soaked up years of silence. The brothers exchanged a look that wasn't excitement or fear, just a quiet acknowledgement of the work ahead. They had cleared construction sites, abandoned garages, and flooded basements before, but this felt different even before they lifted the first bag. They started by pulling 3 of the large black bags toward the doorway, wanting to create space to move around. The plastic crinkled in a way that sounded wrong, as if the contents weren't soft or shapeless like clothes or trash. Instead, each bag held something with weight and edges, stacked so tightly that the bags bulged at uneven angles. The twins weren't naive. They had seen hoarder units, they had cleaned out some themselves, but nothing about these bags fit the usual pattern. They were tied the exact same way, knotted identically, and packed with the kind of deliberate care that had nothing to do with garbage. The first bag split open when they lifted it too quickly, and a cascade of old metal parts spilled onto the concrete floor. Not the rusty scraps you'd expect, but polished components, gears, plates, and unfamiliar fittings that looked like they belonged to machines they had never worked on. Some pieces were wrapped in thin layers of wax paper, yellowed around the edges but still intact. The brothers crouched down, touching each piece as if trying to identify its purpose, but every shape felt foreign. It was the first moment a flicker of unease rose, though neither said it aloud. They opened a second bag. More metal. More parts. Some small enough to fit in a palm, others almost the length of a forearm. A faint scent of machine oil drifted upward, sharp and persistent. The twins weren't experts in everything mechanical, but they had enough experience to recognize when something didn't belong in a hobbyist's collection. Whoever packed these pieces knew what they were doing. The arrangement was too neat, the wrapping too precise, the components too specialized. Still, neither of them allowed their mind to jump to conclusions. They had learned that when you don't know what you're dealing with, the worst thing you can do is imagine patterns that aren't there. By the time they opened the third bag, the pattern was there, unmistakable. More parts, more metal, and tucked between them, a stack of narrow envelopes labeled with numbers and short codes. The handwriting was small, firm, and exact, the kind used by people who spent their lives working in blueprints or military catalogs. The discovery made both brothers pause longer than they meant to. That was the moment the younger twin finally said, quietly but steadily, that maybe they should slow down and think. Not stop, just take a breath and understand what, exactly, they had in front of them. His brother nodded, even though stopping was the last thing either of them wanted. They were broke, desperate, and this unit was the only chance they'd had in months. If something valuable was hidden in these bags, walking away now would feel like betrayal of themselves, of their father, of everything they had lost. As they cleared more of the front section, they realized the strange uniformity stretched deeper into the unit. Every bag felt the same, heavy, dense, carefully tied. The cardboard boxes were sealed with old packing tape that cracked when touched, not brittle from age but layered so many times that it looked like someone wanted them permanently closed. A narrow aisle led toward the wooden trunk, the largest single object in the space. It was wedged behind 2 rows of stacked bags, positioned almost ceremonially, like a centerpiece in a room built from plastic and secrets. Before moving toward it, the twins decided to open a few boxes, not out of impatience, but out of strategy. If the boxes held trash or books or household items, then maybe the bags were nothing more than an elaborate hoarder's habit. But the first box they opened only deepened their confusion. Inside were neatly arranged metal cylinders, wrapped individually in plastic sleeves. Each cylinder was stamped with sequences of letters and numbers that didn't match any tool or part they had worked with before. The pieces were clean, cold to the touch, and clearly manufactured for a purpose neither brother could name. The second box held something different: stacks of old manuals, schematics, and technical papers, some with edges burned slightly, others with pages torn out. The documents were packed too deliberately to be junk, but too incomplete to make sense. The twins flipped through them slowly, recognizing bits of engineering language, noting older dates printed in faded ink. They exchanged a glance that wasn't fear, but something more like sober realization. This wasn't a random collection of parts. It was something systematic, something large-scale, and something hidden. Each discovery brought them closer to acknowledging the truth they didn't want to say out loud. None of this should have ended up in an abandoned storage unit. As the afternoon sun shifted higher, a bead of sweat formed at the edge of the older twin's brow. He wiped it with the back of his hand, exhaling deeply as he surveyed the mess they'd made: metal scattered, bags torn open, paperwork piled on the cooler lid they had brought for water. It didn't look like a simple cleanup anymore. It looked like excavation. The kind that revealed stories, not objects. In that moment, the younger brother suggested they step outside for air. Not to retreat, but to clear their heads. They sat on the low concrete lip of the unit, drinking water slowly as they tried to piece together a theory that made sense. Old machine parts weren't unusual. Obscure technical components weren't unusual. But this quantity, this consistency, this level of organization, nothing about it matched typical storage junk. And the wooden trunk waiting in the back only made the tension coil tighter. It was during this pause that one of the facility workers passed by, pushing a cart filled with replacement locks. He smiled politely, nodding at the twins as he always did, but then he glanced briefly at their unit, at the neat rows of identical bags, at the parts glinting in the sun, and his expression shifted ever so slightly. Not fear, not alarm, just the kind of quiet recognition someone has when they see something they didn't expect. He asked if they needed help moving heavier items later. His tone was casual, but the offer lingered with a weight the brothers didn't quite understand. They thanked him and said they'd be fine for now, though they already guessed they would accept the help before the 48 hours were up. Before heading back into the unit, the older twin picked up a small metal component lying near the entrance. It was perfectly shaped, smooth, almost elegant in its precision. He turned it between his fingers, feeling the weight, thinking about how many identical pieces they had already found. Something about it felt too intentional, too purposeful to be abandoned. He placed it gently back on the cooler, steadying himself with a breath. They needed money. They needed a break. They needed something to go right. And maybe, just maybe, something inside this unit could finally turn their luck around. But something else settled in the air at that moment. Not danger, not certainty, just the quiet awareness that the deeper they dug, the more complicated this was going to become. As they stepped back into the shadows of Unit 46, both brothers sensed the same thing without speaking it aloud. The truth inside this storage unit wasn't going to reveal itself easily. By late afternoon, the sun had begun its slow descent behind the rows of identical storage buildings, casting long shadows through the open doorway of Unit 46. The twins had managed to clear a walkway all the way to the wooden trunk, though clear was a generous word for the narrow channel carved between scattered metal parts, stacks of technical papers, and neatly tied bags that seemed to multiply each time they shifted them aside. Despite the growing fatigue in their shoulders, a current of determination pushed them forward. They had agreed silently that whatever was hidden in this unit wasn't ordinary, and extraordinary things had a way of turning into opportunity if handled carefully. The trunk looked even larger up close, its dark wood etched with an age that felt older than anything else in the unit. Its brass fittings were dulled to a shadowed bronze, and a thin film of dust softened the edges of the carved trim. There was no lock, which in itself struck both brothers as unusual. People locked trunks to protect valuables or hide secrets. Leaving one unsecured suggested a strange confidence or a deliberate decision. The older twin placed his palms on the lid, applying slow, steady pressure until the hinges groaned reluctantly and allowed the top to rise. The scent that escaped was unlike the metallic smell from the bags. It carried a coolness, like air trapped for decades, mixed with hints of aged paper and something faintly medicinal. The brothers leaned over the edge, expecting more metal components or perhaps the personal belongings of someone overly attached to a meticulous hobby. Instead, they found stacks of small wooden boxes fitted with brass hinges, each lined neatly in rows. Every box looked handcrafted, not mass-produced. The grain matched perfectly, the corners joined with precision, the varnish aged to a soft amber glow. The younger twin lifted the first box carefully. It was light but firm, with a faint rattle inside when tilted. He opened it slowly. Inside lay a set of narrow glass vials, each secured in a carved slot. The vials were empty except for faint traces of a silvery residue at the bottom, barely visible unless the light caught it at the right angle. He tapped the edge of one vial gently. It chimed lightly, too delicate for anything industrial. They opened a second box. More vials. A third. More still. Only when they reached the fourth box did something different appear. A stack of envelopes sealed with thick black wax, arranged flat like they were meant to be discovered in a specific order. The envelopes carried numbered markings, nothing more, just a series of digits written in the same tidy handwriting they had seen on the envelopes inside the trash bags. A quiet tension settled in the air. Whatever these boxes were, whatever these vials once held, it was clear someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to protect them. And the twins knew enough to recognize that the more organized and uniform an abandoned storage unit was, the more likely it held value or trouble. The older brother crouched beside the trunk, gently lifting a tray of boxes to reveal the layer beneath. The second level held something entirely different, stacks of ledgers wrapped in faded cloth, heavy with the thickness of pages and time. He placed one on the floor and untied the cloth. Inside were handwritten entries covering every inch of each page, rows of numbers, names, and abbreviations. Some entries were in English, others in a language neither twin recognized. But one thing stood out. Many pages repeated the same phrase in bold, deliberate lettering, Lot Series 12, Confidential Inventory. The phrase struck a familiar chord with the younger twin. He had seen similar phrasing on the technical papers earlier, though in fragments, half-burned or partially missing. Confusion gave way to curiosity, and curiosity gave way to something sharper, the quiet hum of possibility. If someone had hidden these ledgers and delicate vials with such care, maybe this was more than a forgotten personal collection. Maybe it was part of something much larger. As they continued examining the trunk, the sound of footsteps approached slowly from the main pathway. Heavy but measured, the steps belonged to the facility worker who had passed earlier with the cart of locks. He paused in the doorway, his gaze moving from the trunk to the scattered bags, then to the twins. His expression revealed nothing, but his eyes rested on the metal components longer than expected. He asked again if they needed help lifting anything heavy. His tone was the same polite friendliness he'd used before, but something about the timing, appearing exactly as they reached the most significant part of the unit, felt slightly off. Still, the twins didn't sense danger. They had known him casually for months. He was the type of employee who remembered birthdays, who offered cold water on hot days, who waved whenever he saw them unloading tools. The older twin thanked him and explained that they were still figuring out how to approach the trunk. The worker nodded, stepping inside just far enough to take a closer look at the bags. He commented lightly on how unusual it was for a unit to be packed so tightly and consistently, especially one that had been abandoned for years. His voice held a mild curiosity, nothing more, but the younger twin felt a small tug of caution, not fear, just the instinct to keep certain details to themselves until they understood what they had found. Before the worker left, he mentioned almost casually that if they discovered anything valuable, old coins, rare parts, collectibles, he knew a local shop that paid fairly for unusual finds. He offered the name without prompting, scribbling it quickly on a scrap of paper pulled from his pocket. The twins thanked him and watched him disappear down the row. For a moment, neither spoke. The suggestion felt harmless, but the timing lingered in their minds like a thin shadow. They returned to the trunk, determined to finish examining it before daylight faded. As they lifted the final tray of wooden boxes, something shifted beneath. A hidden compartment, seamless and flush with the trunk's interior, clicked faintly as the lid slid aside. Inside lay a small metal case, no larger than a lunchbox, polished to a muted sheen. It had no markings, no labels, but its weight when lifted was startling, dense, heavier than anything its size had a right to be. The twins placed it gently on the floor, exchanging a silent glance that spoke of equal parts anticipation and caution. Before opening it, they took a moment to breathe, to center themselves. The older twin's hand hovered above the latch, steady but tense. He flicked it open. Inside lay a single object wrapped in dark cloth. The fabric felt cool and smooth, almost like silk. As they unwrapped it, the texture of the metal beneath emerged, cold, intricately engraved, unmistakably crafted with purpose. It wasn't a weapon, but it wasn't decorative either. It was some kind of mechanism built from interlocking plates and polished segments, with markings etched along its spine. The twins couldn't identify it, but something about its design radiated intention, as if it had been built to fit precisely into something else. And suddenly, the dozens of metal parts in the trash bags made more sense. They weren't random. They were components. Pieces of something larger, something complex, something hidden deliberately in plain sight. It was at this moment that the younger brother, almost without thinking, mentioned that if people enjoyed stories like theirs, people scraping by, stumbling onto mysteries in forgotten corners, they could always show support for creators who told them. He said it casually, naturally, like it belonged in the flow of conversation, not as an advertisement but as a reflection. People appreciated stories of resilience, of chance, of courage disguised as desperation. Maybe others would want to hear how this unfolded, to like, to follow, to comment where they were watching from. And just as quickly, the thought drifted aside as they faced the object in the box once more. Because as the sunset dimmed into the storage aisle, both brothers realized the same unsettling truth. Whatever they had just uncovered didn't belong in an abandoned unit, and someone, somewhere, must have known it was here. They didn't yet know what the object was. They didn't know why everything was so meticulously packed. But they did know one thing. Their luck hadn't just changed. Their lives had begun shifting towards something neither of them could predict. And outside, in the deepening dusk, a slow-moving car rolled quietly past the row of units before disappearing around the corner. By the following morning, the narrow walkway inside Unit 46 looked less like an accidental clearing and more like the beginning of a path into a buried archive. The twins returned early, long before the usual hum of the facility began, carrying fresh thermoses of coffee and the quiet alertness of men who had spent the night turning over possibilities they weren't ready to name aloud. The air inside the unit still carried the faint metallic sharpness that clung to the trash bags and wooden crates, a scent that lingered on their clothes as if the story unfolding inside this narrow metal box had already begun marking them. They started by sorting everything into deliberate sections. The ledgers from the trunk in one stack, the vials and boxes in another, and the metal components in a growing collection near the entrance. The younger twin observed that the sheer quantity of matching bags suggested a system rather than chaos, and the more he studied the engraved device from the metal case, the more convinced he became that the unit held not random scraps but parts of a single, targeted intention. These weren't items someone discarded casually, they were hidden by someone with precision, someone who expected them to remain untouched for years. As they worked, they made notes in a tablet the older brother had borrowed from a neighbor. He wrote deliberate descriptions of each item, not because they planned to publish anything, but because they sensed the unit was larger than the two of them, larger even than the money they desperately hoped it might bring. Every time he listed serial markings or sketched a rough outline of a component, he wondered what kind of person had assembled all this and why that person had vanished without leaving instructions behind. By midday, the twins had opened nearly every bag except the heaviest one, the one that seemed to have settled into the corner like a stubborn reminder that the most important answers rarely sit in plain sight. They kept postponing it, telling themselves they needed to finish the smaller items first, yet both brothers felt the subtle tension of avoidance. Whatever was inside the heavy bag didn't feel dangerous, but it did feel consequential. When they finally pulled it into the center of the unit, the plastic crackled under their hands. It was tied with reinforced cable rather than ordinary string, and the knot looked like it had been looped by someone trained to secure equipment in harsh conditions. The younger twins sliced through it with a box cutter, and a muted clatter sounded from inside, not metal clinking, but something dense settling against itself. They opened the bag slowly. Inside were pieces of a larger mechanism, arranged carefully in layers of foam sheets. Some were cylindrical, others curved, with grooves that matched the plates of the smaller device from the metal case. Each piece bore identical engravings, a series of repeating symbols arranged like a code. Beside the components lay a binder wrapped in waterproof canvas, its cover stiffened by age but still intact. They unfolded it and found pages filled with diagrams showing a machine of unfamiliar purpose, its shape suggesting a hybrid between a measuring instrument and a containment system. None of the diagrams explained its function explicitly, but the careful labeling of each part matched the components scattered throughout the unit. The blueprint-like pages indicated someone had been assembling this device piece by piece, perhaps testing variations or recording adjustments. And the deeper the twins flipped, the more they saw corrections, additions, and hand-drawn schematics that indicated the project had evolved over many years. A chill settled in the older twins' chest. Machines built slowly and secretly, documented across decades, rarely belonged to harmless hobbies. They belonged to research, to discretion, sometimes to desperation. He whispered that they needed to consider whether they had just walked into something that could attract the wrong kind of attention. But the younger twin reminded him quietly that if they gave up now, they might lose the only chance they had found in months to change their circumstances. He wasn't dismissing the risk, he was acknowledging the reality that stepping away from potential opportunity wasn't something they could afford. They continued analyzing the binder. Several pages included handwritten side notes describing adjustments to pressure valves, containment thresholds, and calibration forms tied to unknown chemical identifiers, terms that looked scientific but carried no context. Yet what unsettled them most wasn't the technical terminology. It was a brief notation in the margin of one late page: components secured, documentation incomplete, possibility of retrieval uncertain. That single sentence suggested the owner of these items had anticipated losing access to them, maybe even expected the storage unit to be discovered by someone else. Around this time, the younger twin paused, leaning against a crate while rubbing his forehead with the back of his wrist. He said quietly that if people listening to their story understood how sequences like this unfolded, ordinary people stumbling into extraordinary situations, they would appreciate it in ways that went beyond entertainment, and supporting stories like these through something as simple as liking, subscribing, or leaving a comment helped those stories keep being told. The remark slipped in gently, almost as an afterthought, before both brothers returned to their examination of the binder, unaware that this brief moment of reflection would serve as a subtle thread connecting them to the future audience who would follow their journey. As the afternoon waned, the twins stepped outside to catch their breath. The sky had turned into a washed-out canvas of mild blue and pale gold, the kind that made the metal doors gleam faintly. The parking lot was almost empty except for a single dark blue sedan they hadn't noticed earlier. It sat parked farther from the office, angled slightly toward their row of units. The younger twin brushed the observation aside at first, but the older brother's instincts sharpened. They had been in this facility countless times, and almost never did an unfamiliar car linger during non-peak hours. They returned to the unit, raising the door only halfway to keep most of the interior obscured. The younger twin resumed sorting the components, but his brother positioned himself where he could glance outside without appearing obvious. Every few minutes, he checked, and each time, the sedan remained in the same spot, as though waiting for something. The tension slowly thickened. The older twin finally suggested they wrap up for the evening. They couldn't afford to stay in the unit past closing hours, and the presence of the sedan gnawed at him like an itch he couldn't ignore. While packing, he slipped the metal device and the binder into a duffel bag to take home. He reasoned that if someone was indeed watching, leaving the most unusual items behind would be a mistake. When they rolled the door shut and secured the lock, the sedan's headlights flicked on briefly before turning off again, as if someone inside had reacted to their movement. The younger brother tightened his grip on the duffel strap. Neither spoke on the walk to their truck. As they pulled out of the parking lot, they passed the sedan slowly. Its windows were tinted too darkly to see inside. But the angle of the wheels and the way its engine rumbled lightly told the older twin everything he needed. The car wasn't abandoned. Someone was sitting inside. Someone who had been watching. And when the twins turned onto the main road, the sedan waited a full minute before following at a distance that was careful, measured, and unmistakably intentional. That was when the twins realized something simple, undeniable, and unsettling. The story inside Unit 46 was no longer confined to the storage yard. It had already begun reaching into their lives. The following morning arrived with a hushed stillness, the kind that often settles before something decisive. The twins woke earlier than usual, each carrying the weight of an unspoken understanding. Whatever they had uncovered in Unit 46 had moved from curiosity into consequence. Neither blamed the other for what had happened. Both recognized that their lives had been so tightly pressed by circumstance that even the faintest shimmer of possibility felt worth pursuing. Yet as they prepared to return to the storage facility, they understood more clearly than ever that possibility often came paired with risk, and risk had already begun watching them from a darkened sedan. When they reached the facility, the lot looked deceptively ordinary. A few cars belonging to regular renters sat scattered near the office, and the morning sun cast long, soft shadows across the rows of units. But the calm veneer didn't fool either of them. As they approached Unit 46, the older brother noticed the faintest line of disturbed dust near the lock, a thin, curved trail that hadn't been there the day before. Someone had touched the latch, maybe tested it. The metal looked cold and slightly smudged, as though a gloved hand had pressed against it during the night. Inside, however, nothing appeared stolen or overturned. The bags were where they had been left, the crates remained undisturbed, and the air carried the same metallic sharpness as always. That lack of disturbance unsettled them more than visible damage would have. Someone had come close enough to inspect the lock but not close enough to risk entering. It felt like a warning rather than an attempt. They worked in silence for nearly an hour, cataloging the final group of components while the binder lay open beside them. The deeper they studied it, the clearer its purpose became. This machine, whatever it was intended to do, appeared designed to regulate pressure, measure substances, and seal volatile materials with an unusual degree of precision. The younger twins speculated it might have belonged to someone researching chemical containment, perhaps a scientist or an engineer who had been working independently. The older brother found several references in the binder to temperature thresholds and stabilization cycles, terms that suggested the device was built for something delicate, perhaps even dangerous if mishandled. It was also clear that the device was unfinished. Several diagrams showed empty slots, incomplete assemblies, and question marks in the margins. Whoever hid the components inside this unit had been interrupted before finalizing their work. That realization tightened something in the older twin's chest, because projects that require secrecy and remain unfinished rarely end peacefully. As they reorganized the crates, the younger twin voiced a worry he had kept to himself. If the person who built this machine hadn't returned for it in all these years, perhaps something had happened to them. Perhaps the sedan watching them wasn't tied to a current threat, but to a lingering one. Someone attempting to retrieve or destroy the work of a person who had vanished without leaving instructions. It was speculation, but the quiet dread in his voice made it sound uncomfortably plausible. By midday, sun spilled into the unit in a warm, angled beam, illuminating dust motes that drifted slowly in the heavy air. The older brother stepped outside to stretch, and as he did, he noticed the same dark blue sedan parked near the edge of the lot. This time, the driver's silhouette was visible through the windshield, still, patient, and facing their direction. No attempt to hide. No attempt to approach. Just deliberate observation. He didn't mention it immediately. Instead, he walked back inside, collected his thoughts, and considered how to frame the situation without alarming his brother unnecessarily. Before he could speak, the younger twin nodded toward the sedan and quietly confirmed he had already seen it. They didn't need words to acknowledge that something was approaching a tipping point. The binder lay open again on the crate between them, and the older brother pointed to a page that mentioned Custodian Retrieval Protocol, followed by an arrow and a list of coded identifiers. He speculated this could be a clue that the device might have been intended for handoff to a specific party, perhaps someone from a research team or a classified project. If so, it would explain why the components were hidden beneath layers of unrelated trash bags. Disguising the device was essential to keeping it from the wrong people. But the owner had disappeared before completing that transfer, leaving the unit suspended in time until the twins unknowingly reopened a door someone else had tried to close forever. It was at this moment, while both brothers leaned over the binder to decipher the markings, that the younger twin made a soft remark about how stories like theirs often seemed unbelievable until ordinary people stepped into them. He said that if anyone listening to their journey felt that quiet pull of recognition, the sense that life sometimes hands you mysteries wrapped inside hardship, then supporting the telling of such stories through likes, subscriptions, or comments helped ensure these glimpses into forgotten corners didn't fade. The thought was gentle, almost contemplative, and flowed naturally before both returned to the binder, unaware of how smoothly the moment had folded itself into the rhythm of the day. Shortly after, the turning point arrived without warning. A maintenance worker from the facility, a man the twins recognized from past visits, approached the unit. His expression carried the polite neutrality of someone performing routine rounds, yet his eyes darted past them toward the crates inside. He asked casually if they needed help hauling anything heavy. But the way he phrased it suggested he already knew they did. The older twin sensed something amiss, thanked him, and declined. The worker lingered, studying the bags, before eventually walking away. As he disappeared toward the main office, the younger twin whispered a realization. The maintenance worker must have seen the sedan too. And if he had been watching their unit long enough to notice what was happening inside, then he might have also mentioned it to someone else. The storage facility wasn't isolated. It had eyes, routines, patterns. And any break in those patterns drew attention. The twins decided to conclude their work early. They boxed the components carefully, leaving only the debris and torn wrappings behind. The binder and the metal device went into the same duffel bag as the day before. The older brother insisted they take everything of potential value with them, not because they intended to sell it, but because leaving the items in the unit felt increasingly unsafe. As they shut the door and secured the lock, the sedan's engine turned on, idling with a soft, unwavering purr. The older twin stiffened. The younger twin glanced over his shoulder, gripping the duffel strap a little tighter. They walked toward their truck at a steady pace, determined not to look hurried. The sedan pulled out behind them as soon as they exited the gate. At first, it followed at a reasonable distance, matching their turns without drawing close. But as they continued toward their neighborhood, the car tightened its gap, inching forward at red lights, moving deliberately into their mirror's center frame. The older twin suggested turning onto side streets, not to flee but to test whether the tale was coincidence. Each turn was mirrored exactly. When they reached a quiet road leading to an industrial park, the younger twin pointed to a wide gravel lot where several other vehicles were parked. They pulled in, and the sedan eased to a stop across the street. Its engine stayed running. Its headlights remained off. Yet the message needed no translation. Someone was waiting for them to make the next move. The twins sat in their truck, surrounded by silence broken only by a distant hum of machinery from the warehouses. The older brother suggested calling authorities, but the younger reminded him that if this machine truly belonged to a research program or a private custodian, involving outsiders could complicate matters or even endanger them further. After a long moment, the sedan's passenger door opened. A man stepped out, not hurried, not aggressive, simply composed. He walked several steps forward, stopped at a respectful distance, and raised one hand slightly as if to signal he meant no harm. His voice, when he spoke, carried a calm firmness. He explained that he represented a private technical group tasked decades ago with retrieving the unfinished device. The project had been abandoned when its creator disappeared unexpectedly, and the group had spent years attempting to locate the components before they were misused or mishandled. The storage unit had been flagged long ago, but bureaucratic entanglements delayed action until recently, just long enough for the twins to purchase it at auction. He did not demand, threaten, or coerce. He simply stated that his employer needed the machine returned. He understood the twins had acted in good faith and expressed appreciation that they had treated the components carefully. What neither brother expected came next. The man offered compensation. Not as a bribe, not as a payoff, but as formal restitution for accidentally pulling them into a forgotten project. The amount he offered was not extravagant but substantial enough to lift the weight that had been pressing on both of them for years, enough to pay debts, repair their truck, and breathe without fear of the next bill. The older twin asked a single question. If the machine was unfinished and dangerous, why not destroy it? The man replied that unfinished did not mean useless. The project had once aimed to create a safer, more efficient method of containing volatile substances used in industrial work. Its creator had vanished before completing the stabilizer system. The organization intended to evaluate whether the work could be finished or whether it should be archived permanently. The twins exchanged a long, thoughtful glance. Both understood they weren't engineers, researchers, or custodians of specialized knowledge. They were two men who had taken a chance out of necessity and stumbled into someone else's unfinished legacy. And now they were being offered a way out, one that did not sacrifice their integrity or their safety. They agreed. The duffel bag, the crates, the binder, and the sealed bags returned to the custody of the man who had approached them. The transaction was documented, signed with copies for everyone, and conducted with a level of professionalism that surprised even the older twin. When everything was loaded into the sedan, the man thanked them sincerely and advised them to enjoy the breathing room they had earned. Then he drove away, leaving behind a stillness so complete it felt like the world had exhaled. In the weeks that followed, life began smoothing into something gentler. The debt notices stopped arriving. The truck received its long overdue repairs. The twins reopened their small workshop, not as a desperate attempt to survive but as a deliberate choice to rebuild. They told no one what they had found inside Unit 46, not because they feared disbelief, but because they understood the value of quiet stewardship. Some discoveries were never meant to turn into spectacle. The true reward, however, came from something quieter than money. It came from the realization that their resilience, their patience, and their refusal to cut corners had guided them through a situation far more complex than they had ever imagined. They had navigated fear without surrendering to it, handled uncertainty without losing themselves, and stepped back from temptation when another path revealed itself. Months later, the facility manager mentioned casually that Unit 46 had been cleared and reassigned, its contents officially marked as retrieved by authorized party. No further explanation. No lingering shadow. The story ended exactly where it needed to. The twins never saw the sedan again. But sometimes, when they passed rows of identical storage units, the older brother would pause for a brief moment, remembering the smell of dust and metal and the unexpected doorway that had opened into another person's forgotten work. He never regretted walking away from that mystery. Some stories belonged to those who created them, and the greatest strength he and his brother had shown was knowing when to hand them back. Because in the end, the true fortune they found was not hidden inside a crate or bag. It was the stability they reclaimed, the quiet dignity they earned, and the reminder that even in desperate times, it is possible for ordinary people to meet extraordinary moments with integrity and win something lasting from them.